by spirituality. All right, not everyone would define themselves as being religious, but spirituality is a part of human experience. Spirituality involves the recognition of a feeling or sense or belief that there's something greater than myself, something more to being human than my experience, and that the greater whole of which we are a part is cosmic or divine in nature. Spirituality means knowing that our lives have significance in a context beyond the mundane everyday existence. At the level, beyond the mundane everyday existence at the level of biological needs that drive selfishness and aggression. It means knowing that we're a significant part of a purposeful unfolding of life in our universe. Spirituality involves exploring certain universal themes: love, compassion, altruism, life after death perhaps, truth, and wisdom. All right. So, what's healthy spirituality? Healthy spirituality recognizes that God is beyond our understanding. It focuses on a relationship with God based on unconditional love and not performance. Healthy spirituality demonstrates a compassion toward others. It accepts ambiguity, unanswered questions, and doubts. Doubt is a part of faith. It respects the uniqueness of individuals and fosters tolerance and openness to other religious beliefs. On the other hand, emotionally unhealthy spirituality ignores the emotions of anger, sadness, and fear. It denies the past impact on the present. It lives without limits or boundaries. It judges other people's spiritual journey, believes that we can totally understand everything, and it refuses to tolerate ambiguities, unanswered questions, and even doubts. So some facets of healthy spirituality are healthy relationships, treating ourselves and others with respect, honesty, integrity, and love. Values, not only the things we say we care about, but also the things that cause us to behave as we do. In other words, there's an integrity thing there. You may say certain things are your values, but if you behave otherwise, then I submit to you that might not be your real values. People who are spiritually healthy are able to articulate their purpose in life and make choices that manifest that purpose. So, what do ex-members need? Well, they need to regain a belief or trust in themselves and others. They need to recapture a sense of purpose. They need to reconnect with their spirituality. They need to reestablish peace with God. And let me just interject a parenthetical comment here. I realize we're kind of putting this out in a PowerPoint presentation as though it were simple, and it might indeed be simple, but that's not to say that it's easy. We're talking about a process that takes time and can take years. A long process of struggle, reestablishing peace with God. But that was a difficult thing. Oh man. Speaking for myself. But I think other people have similar experiences. And you need a safe place and persons to process spiritual confusion. Wendy and I were super fortunate because we stumbled into a good enough church eventually, and that became very much a healing place for us. They were there to help us process through a lot of our questions, doubts, and confusion. And they didn't foist anything on us. They let us process it to a healthy resolution of a lot of things. And of course, we met some very good people there that became friends. So people need to regain belief in themselves and in a world that allows room for bad things to happen to good people. Paul Martin, many of you may remember Paul Martin. He used to run a recovery place called Wellspring, which is still going, but it's sad that Paul Martin has passed away. In his chapter on post-recovery, post-cult recovery in the book Recovery from Cults, wrote, former Bible-based cultists who have experienced the act of being reconciled to and having accepted God have been provided with a way to see growth and healing in their lives that was hitherto unavailable to them. And the act of grace provides for two miracles, love for God and love for self. So, obstacles to spirituality. Obviously, people get stuck in their anger toward God. Have the fear that God has forever left them. I've struggled with that a bit. When I came out of my cult, viewing all religious activity with a cynical eye. That's actually probably to be expected initially. And it's probably healthy initially. Inability to expunge the cult's image of God. That's a lot of the work that you have to do is refigure out who God is and come up with a healthy concept of God. And an inability to see God's love and mercy. Obviously, God is the real God, I believe, is a loving and merciful God. The ex-cultist doesn't trust his instincts or discernment, and that's part of the problem. He's got great distrust of anyone in authority. People will very typically have a strong aversion to church, the Bible, and other Christians. And churches themselves don't do a good job, I have to say. They often misunderstand or judge former cultists. I remember one minister we went to afterwards, and he was a very good man, and he was willing to listen to our story. But at one point he said, it just goes to show how important it is to know the Bible. Well, like that's going to inoculate you from a cult. Well, Wendy actually already had a degree from a seminary before we got into our cult. She knew the Bible very well, and if I do say so, I knew it better. So, we knew the Bible really well. Our cult leader knew the Bible really well. He had his own interpretation. He had his own twist on it. But he could debate seminary professors and come out on top because he knew the Bible so well. Part of it was he had photographic memory, so he could quote long passages of Scripture without it, anything in front of him. Obviously, people struggle with an inability to see God's love and mercy. So, I want to close my little part here with another quote from Paul Martin. He said, "It is vital that ex-members' moral outrage not be treated as pathological. The job of being free and the rage that comes with understanding what has happened actually serve to cleanse the person spiritually. The feelings must run their course. At this point, at the point of letting the feelings run their course, that's when the recovery to post-life begins, post-cult life begins." All right, well, let me take over. The next part, probably more accurately, she let me do the first one. Yeah.
I wanted to say a little bit about anger, though. When I left the cult, and I found this is true of a lot of people, we are overwhelmed with anger toward God. I did not even like God, to tell you the truth. And I would tell him, I'd say, God, I don't like you. I want my relationship back with you. I want to be connected to you again, but I don't like you. And our cult leader taught that God was wrathful, and he didn't have any mercy, and he wanted to squish you like a bug. He didn't want to have a relationship with you personally. He only wanted a relationship with the bride, and the bride was, everybody, in his circle. So if you left, and of course, you left God.
Hey, but say something to introduce yourself, because I introduced myself.
Oh, my name is Wendy Duncan. And I am from Dallas, Texas, married to Duncan. And, they wouldn't want to let us get married for no long reason. Well, it's all about control. And so we've been married now 18 years, so, kind of lasts. So. And the 7 years, you have to count, louder? Okay, and you have to count the 7 years we were dating, so that's 7 plus 18 is 25 years. We say that every year, and they say it in the planes. And I went to Southwestern Seminary. Yes, I was recruited into the cult by my husband, Duncan. And at first when I got there, I had a seminary background. When I first got there, I thought, I don't like these people. And it was like a great big old family, and that's how Doug introduced it to me. It was like a great big old dinner. A great big old family. On Sunday nights, we have a potluck, and we just get together. And of course, when I got there, it was wonderful. They do that love bombing so that you want to be there. Everything's wonderful and magical and everything. The music was amazing. I have to say that the music was amazing. Well, but you know what? I thought to myself, I don't believe what these people believe. And then, I kept going and going and going, and at some point I was like, I don't know what I believe anymore. And then at the end, I started believing what I believed. And that's a part of that thought reform process. Okay, talking.
Did I go ahead?
I'm going to talk about that yesterday.
Okay.
So how do we feel that, after we leave a cult, how do we feel that emptiness of the soul? How do we get past those feelings of confusion, disillusionment, our concept of God? How do we recapture a sense of purpose? When we came out of the cult, Doug went back to school, as he mentioned, to get his counseling degree, and I had a full-time job. When I got home in the evening, I didn't know what to do with myself. I was so used to going to Bible studies every single night, and we didn't watch television, we didn't do all those things, so I'd get home and be like, well, what do I do now? I can't imagine that now, there's so much to do. But then, my whole world had been the Trinity Foundation, and I didn't know what people do. So it took a while before I figured that out. But I was overcoming a lot of loneliness at the very beginning. It was probably the worst time in my life. And I wanted more than anything to reconnect with God. So, how do you do that? Well, you have to rethink and rebuild your belief system. You have to, go through the things that the cult taught and then see what you believe now. Bob was talking about the concept of hell yesterday in his session, and one of my friends was there, and she said, when he first started talking, I was like, I'm getting out of here. That hell is a trigger word, and I'm out of here. But then she thought, no, I need to listen, I need to get some new information so that I can process it. And she realized during the course of it that she did need to reconstruct that part of her belief system and figure out, where she believes today. Because she's a Mormon, and there are certain concepts that she still has, that she believes. We also need to learn how to trust ourselves and others. Our cult leader taught that our mind was the Antichrist, and we couldn't trust our minds. So if you can't trust your mind, then you're open to his interpretation, of course. We couldn't trust others either. Doug was mentioning that there was a group of friends that we became friends with, but every Sunday they invited us to go out, to come to their homes for lunch. 1 year, it took us 1 year to be able to go. Because each time they asked us, I would say, oh no, I can't do that. We would make up excuses why we couldn't go. No, because we didn't want to get involved in anything with other Christians. We're still pretty scared of Christians. And now they are very, very good friends. That took us a long while. Also, we need to reframe our concept of God. We need to reframe those trigger words like hell or salvation or forgiveness was a trigger word for me.
Community.
Community is a trigger, yeah, and all those scary words. Kathleen Norris, I don't know how many of y'all have read any of her work, but she said, she was very involved in church when she was young, and then got away from the church in her 20s, and then decided in her 40s to go back. And when she went back to church, she was so triggered. All those words and all those concepts just really triggered her. But she was determined to make her way back to God. And so what she felt like she had to do was those scary words, she had to redefine them. So they were her words. And I thought that was really interesting. And we need to learn how to practice spiritual disciplines. And that's, I'm sure, a little scary for most people, but there are spiritual disciplines like prayer, meditation, whatever, reading, being around other Christians. But what are some of the challenges? We have some water.
You may.
What are some of the challenges? Managing our emotions. We still have a lot, emotions that tend to be out of control. We need to learn to trust again. Identify those triggers. One of the triggers for me also going to church was hearing the song Amazing Grace, because that was a song that was sung at my grandfather's funeral, and he became a Christian late in life, and that was sung at his funeral, so it had a real deep meaning for me. Well, unfortunately, it was my cult leader's favorite song. So when I would hear it in the church, I would start crying, and I mean crying, sobbing. I had to leave the room because it was so overwhelmed with emotions. And I went to a therapist and, talking to her about the different things, and at some point mentioned that song Amazing Grace. That was my grandfather's, but Ole stole it from me. Ole was my cult leader. Ole stole it from me. And she said, well, let's see how we can get that back. I said, I don't want it back. That's his song. I do not want it back. I had a real strong aversion to that song. Well, through the course of time, listening to the song, it's my grandfather's song now. I can sing the song now, but it took years. We also need to conceptualize God differently than the God of the cult. We need to salvage the positive aspects of community. We need to identify those cult-induced fears. For us, leaving our cult meant that we were leaving God. And there were a lot, I'm sure y'all can identify a lot of those cult-induced fears. And then reconnecting with God and others, and as I mentioned, I didn't like God. So reconnecting with Him was difficult. But one of the key aspects of all religious groups is they pervert the view of God. Their image of God is He commands obedience, and the cults use that to promote their own ideology and to command obedience to the cult leader. So, how do we reframe that concept of God so that we have, we redefine, we reconstruct, we reframe who God is, so that He's not the God that hates us, He's not the God that has no mercy, He's wrathful, He's out to squash us like a bug. He doesn't really want to have a relationship with us. We have to pull those apart, and that's a real difficult process. And so we have a perverted sense of view of God, that He's a God of requirements and rewards. He is angry, vengeful, punishing, wrathful. If things go bad, God's punishing me. If things go well, then God is rewarding me. Only concerned about following rules. He requires sacrifices and misery. Use individuals as objects. And I think this is really interesting because so many of us, and especially in our support group, they say, I see God as mean, Why did he allow this to happen to me? Why did he allow all the things in the Bible to happen to people? What kind of God is that? And you know, excuse me, before the Enlightenment, the church didn't think like that. They didn't blame God. They didn't think, oh, God did this to me. God is the reason my child died. God is the reason whatever. He was punishing me. They didn't see it that way. It wasn't until the Enlightenment that we began to focus on ourselves and see that everything was about us. So something happened bad to us is God punished us. So that's one of the perverted images of God that we need to work through. And, did I already say that?
No, just
I suppose they're going to say, okay, next slide. Healing our image of God heals our image of ourselves. So that was Brennan Manning said that. And next one is, the next one too. I don't know how many of y'all have read any of Brennan Manning's books, but Manning's books. They are phenomenal. He was very instrumental in changing my view of God. He wrote Ruthless Trust. He wrote Ragamuffins.
gospel.
Huh?
The Ragamuffin gospel.
Yeah, the Ragamuffin Gospel. Just an amazing man. But he said the revolutionary thinking that God loves me as I am and not as I should be, it requires radical rethinking and profound emotional readjustment. You know, when I finally got that God loves me just like I am, and there's nothing I have to do, there's nothing I have to prove. He loves me just like I am. And that is a radical thinking for most people. Understanding that I am the beloved, that also took a while. And that was Henry Nouwen that talks about really getting hold of that concept that you are beloved, no matter what. And you can keep going, huh? So some of the ways that we heal is by challenging the cult concept of God, which we talked about, and exploring healthier views and teachings about God, reading writings from others who have reclaimed their spirituality, find a safe place to process. We have a support group, as Doug mentioned, that meets once a month, and a lot of the people, you know, still have a major problem with religion, with spirituality, with God, and they say, you know, this is our safe place. This feels like a community to us, this little support group. They are able to find found a safe place to process all their fears, all their doubts, all their you know, just everything. And they know also that we are okay when they talk about God. When they say, I don't believe in God anymore, I hate God, I never want to go into a church again, that's okay for them to say that we allow all that. We allow people to express whatever they need to express. We don't push Christianity on them, we don't push religion on them, and we don't push spirituality. We know that it's a long process, and that they'll come to it when they come to it. And I mentioned some of the ways that I learned to change that I came to change my view of God was by reading books. Such as Brennan Manning, Henry Nouwen, Kathleen Norris, Philip Yancey, and Anne Lamont, who was one of my favorites because she is so out there. She is so just very, very blunt about things. She's very full of a lot of humor, and it's a lot of fun. But I wanted to read, if I can find it. Because I have all these notes, and here are the notes, and I don't know where I am. Does that help you? Okay, I'll get it back. Philip Yancey talked about that he saw God as the God of measurements, about how good he was doing. And then he, if I Okay, so the journey towards emotional and healthy spirituality. You have to learn how to be your own loving friend. Allow time and space to work through that grief, loss, and confusion. Understand the importance of rebuilding the belief system by rethinking and redefining Christian concepts. And as I mentioned a minute ago, that someone who was in Bob's workshop yesterday, she'd been out on learning religion forever, and she just realized that was a concept that she really hasn't dealt with. We also we need to restore our trust in ourselves and in others, that we can discern whether a leader or a teacher or a preacher is teaching wrong doctrine. And we can learn to trust each other again. Oh, here it is. So Philip Yancey said, what is so amazing about grace? In that book, he said, I grew up with the image of a mathematical God who weighed my good and bad deeds on a set of scales and always found me wanting. I imagine God as a distant, thundering figure who prefers fear rather than respect and love. So I think I'm going to give it back to Duncan.
All right, so I got the part with the scary word here about finding a healing community, a trigger word for me. But I will say this, and this is something that worked for us. You may want to consider a church that is significantly different in worship style from the cultic group that you've left. We did that. That's what worked for us. I don't know if it would work for everybody, but our cult was very informal. It was a very evangelical style group. They met in homes. They, sat around on the floor and read the Bible, and there wasn't much to it other than there was preaching and yelling. But we found our way back to God through a liturgical style church. It's very, very different. Still Christian, still under the broad rubric of Christianity, but a very, very different style of worship. I'm going to just kind of go through this. A positive community experience can help heal some of the damage done by the cultic group by providing partly a sense of what is normal and what is healthy. It can be a safe place to process the experience with the abusive group, especially how the group distorted the character of God. It provides a way to continue and have a connection to the transcendent. So while all this was going on, I was still processing. I was reading all kinds of stuff. I was angry. I was, all of this stuff. But still, somehow or another, I was under what Peter Berger has called the sacred canopy. I was a part of something, and that was a big comfort to me. As I mentioned, having something that is considerably different than what you're used to. Okay, therapeutic interventions.
Yes.
Okay, these are some ideas, obviously. Narrative therapy, journaling. There's a new thing we've been learning a little bit about called religious cognitive behavioral therapy. Group therapy. Obviously, you want to practice good self-care and self-nurturing, prayer, meditation, volunteerism. We need to integrate our experience into our life story, so you can tell your story to trusted people. And when we're able to do that, the shame and the guilt decrease, the stories become less powerful and controlling over our everyday life. So it just, I love the story that Wendy tells about how her father had a terrible injury when she was a little girl, and she and her sisters would get together. Every time they would get together at some point, Thanksgiving, Christmas, they would all sit down and talk about.
When we were adults.
When you were adults years later, they would sit down and talk about what happened when their father injured himself. He fell off a horse and he had a closed head injury. And they talked about it and they talked about it and they talked about it. But eventually they got to the point where they didn't really talk about it anymore. They finally had processed it through. It was a huge event. It changed all their lives. It was traumatic for the family. But
It was the way that we went through the grief and the loss
right.
of our family.
But because they all understood it, and had been through it together, they were able to talk about it. And I think that's true of those of us who have been in cults and have had these horrible traumatic experiences. We need to find a place where we can just talk about it.
And let me just interrupt you.
Mhm.
I know we only have about 5 minutes, but that is something that we do in our support group. We let people talk. We have usually do some kind of psychosocial part, and then we move to the processing. We feel like it's very important for people to tell their story. And the first time they tell it, it's usually like it's, here, there, it's all over the place. And it's very disjointed. You really can't get a picture of what happened to them. But the more that they tell it, the more it becomes a complete story. So just by talking, having people around you that, agree with what you're saying, know what you went through, and they're okay with you being kind of all over the place, that they eventually get a narrative, and they eventually integrate that experience into their whole life history. And I think it's Brene Brown that said, owning our story is one of the bravest things that we can do. To not be ashamed of those times when we were in a cult, but to see it as a time that
It becomes integrated into our life story.
is a part of our journey, it's a part of our experience. And we're forever changed through this, something that'll make us more compassionate, and all kinds of benefits actually come out of it.
Yeah, post-traumatic growth. So, spirituality is not a formula. It is not a test, it's a relationship. Spirituality is not about competency. Thank goodness for that. It is about intimacy. It's not about perfection. As Wendy will tell you, I'm not perfect. It's about connection. The way of the spiritual life begins where we are now in the mess of our lives. This is Mike Duncan. I do agree with him. He's a very interesting guy. The goal of our spiritual journey is to become our true self, the self that defines itself as beloved by God. For those of us who became involved in a religious cult or an abusive group, we did start out with a trusting heart. We wanted to learn about God, we wanted to find the truth, or we wanted to become enlightened, whatever that was. Yet the incidents of abuse, loss, betrayal, unrealistic expectations that were put on us, the perverted image of God that was taught us, left us with a warped and damaged view of religion and God. After we left the cult, we were overwhelmed with feelings of guilt, anxiety, depression, low self-esteem, loneliness and isolation, distrust of other people or groups, aversion to any structure or authority, and we were cynical about religion. But we can heal. We can heal. And that's really our message here. So appreciate your listening to us, and I think we'll cover.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment because as you were talking a lot, you're using the words like rebuilding and stuff like that, which I understand because you actually had something before.
We did.
Right, whereas in my case, I grew up with nothing.
Right.
And I had no concept of God at all, and went in and learned this horrible.
Right.
Learned
about it.
It's not rebuilding, it's like building.
And,
I mean, some of this stuff is, totally applicable.
right.
But I just wanted to say that for us that didn't have anything, it's like building something. It's
Absolutely. That's an excellent point. Yes. Build, and I think actually when we originally said this, we did say building or rebuilding. We may have been lost in the process of all the iterations that went through, but you're exactly right. I mean, some people, and there were people in our cultic group that was the case for. They they didn't have any exposure to God before getting into our group. So I think Wendy and I were more fortunate because we did have some sense, some positive sense of something that we could go back to. But that's a good point. Yes, ma'am.
I think that I'd like to add that being a fourth generation survivor, all of this is compounded.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah, the layers of complexity on that. As I said a little bit earlier, maybe we lay this out in a PowerPoint like it's simple, but no, we totally get it's not easy, and there's a lot of stuff that people have to okay, I think our time is about done. I don't want to go into any of Bob's time here, so if there are other questions, maybe we can chat after.